Welcome to day 162 of our Bible reading. We are now on Job 35 to 37. It has really been a roller coaster ride, especially the book of Job. I think even when we are discussing at 5 o'clock during our Zoom discussions, our daily Zoom discussions, we have gone through so many emotions as individuals, as a collective. And for me personally, when we started out with the book of Job, because it's a book that I knew, I actually came into the reading of this book with my own preconceived idea. And as we are discussing, as we're getting input from each other, and as different people are articulating how they see the chapters in this book, I realized that my thinking about who Job is and how he approached his situation, about his friends, and even just about God is beginning to change. And as it changes, it also affects how I view my own suffering, how I view my support when others are suffering, and how my relationship with God changes as I go through difficulty, whether I can explain that difficulty or not. So in these chapters, chapters 36 to 37, we are now hearing for one of Job's friends, Elihu, who had been quiet throughout the entire book until yesterday when he started speaking, because he felt that the other three friends of Job were not representing God well. So as a member of this friendship, he felt the need to be quiet initially, but now he finds himself in a dilemma because he is quiet because he's thinking, I'm still a youth, but at the same time he finds that the older guys are not representing God the way that he wants God represented. So in these three chapters then, he brings his case, and mostly his message is that of defending God. Mostly his message is that of speaking for God, where he's generally saying, Job, regardless of what you are going through, it doesn't change who God is. And the main message for me from these chapters 35 to 37 is the fact that what you are going through must never change who God is. What you are going through must not now say to you, if I'm suffering and I'm just, or I'm suffering and I'm righteous, then it must mean that there is something wrong with God's system, there's something wrong with God's process, there's something wrong with God's way of doing things. So as human beings, we also find that we want to reduce God to our experience. And I find that Elihu here is saying, Job, regardless of where you are, regardless of your situation, regardless of the unfairness and the suffering that you think you are going through, your own personal experience, your own change could never change who God is. The principles of who God is, the fact that he's just does not change. And I want us to look at a couple of things that Elihu then speaks about. In Job 35, from the top really, but let's zoom in on verse 7. He says, if Job, if you are good, is this some great gift to God? What could you possibly give God? No, your sins affect only people like yourself, and your good deeds also affect only humans. So and I think that is so important, because sometimes we want to deal with God at our level. We want to be rational with God. We want to use our minds to think about God. And for me personally, one of the things that I think drive me as a Christian is the fact that, yes, my thinking maybe here, maybe intelligent, logical in the way that I approach life, etc. But I must always remember that I cannot deal with God at this level, because God is at a much higher level. So when I try to use my brain, which is at this level, to deal with God, I end up finding that I fail. So here God is saying, Elihu is saying to Job, I see you speaking on your behalf, trying to justify where you are, but always remember that all these good and bad things that we do as human beings don't necessarily affect God, but they affect us as one another. And in verse 9, he then says, verse 10 rather, he says, when people are oppressed and they are groaning, they don't ask, where is God, my creator, the one who gives songs in the night? And again here, Elihu is trying his entire message throughout these chapters. He is saying to Job, instead of trying to measure God through the eyes of your circumstances, just look at God, because God, in a way, is not necessarily changed by what we're going through. He's not necessarily changed by how righteous or unrighteous we are. So don't try to reduce God to your circumstances, but rather look at him as God. And I mean, as a younger person, Elihu even says very sharp words like, but you are talking nonsense, Job. You have spoken like a fool. And I mean, for some of us, especially in our culture, you cannot speak to an older person in that manner. So another point that Elihu makes, he says to Job in chapter 36, he says, but by means of their suffering, God rescues those who suffer, for he gets their attention through adversity. And he brings in a very interesting point that I think we've also been discussing in our Zoom discussion, where he says, Job, you may not be suffering because you've done A, B, C, D, but out of your suffering, you may become A, B, C, and D. And sometimes I think we must not be so caught up in what we're going through. Analyze it, discuss it, pray about it to the extent that we actually forget who we are becoming as we are going through the fire. And here, Elihu is saying to Job, instead of just focusing on where you are, think about the person that you are becoming as you are going through what you are going through this. And again in chapter 36 and verse 26, Elihu says, look, God is greater than we can understand. His years cannot be counted. And I think for me, as I read this a message from Elihu, I find that he's moving the attention from Job and what Job is going through, and saying, Job, what you are going through must not change your view of God. And lastly, in chapter 37 verse 14, he says, pay attention to this, Job. Stop and consider the wonderful miracles of God. Imagine you're struggling, you're going through suffering, and a person says, Job, I see that what you're going through is difficult, but just stop focusing on what you're going through and focus on the miracles of God. So for me, I've come to the book of Job with all these ideas that I know how this thing is going to end, and I know how wrong the friends of Job are. But today I actually gave my time to say, you know what, even though the friends may have been harsh, there are messages, profound messages that are hidden in both the poetry of the friends and the poetry of Job. And we would be wrong to only think about the ending and the beginning alone and then miss the message that is in the middle, where the friends are not only talking to Job, but they're talking to our lives, they're talking to our circumstances. Please do not forget to join us at 5 p.m. on Zoom, where we will continue to discuss this powerful book that is also changing our lives. Thank you very much.